It's one thing for fans to say things about Daniel Jones, whose struggles in week 1 against Minnesota were pronounced. It's another thing for one of the Vikings to say it. Vikings linebacker Jonathan Greenard was on KFan Radio, KFAN, in Minneapolis, and said that he actually felt sorry for Daniel Jones during the game.
Man, when we heard the boos ran in there, we were like, okay, now we're good on our side. But when they got really loud to where it was as loud as it would be on a third down, should be, and when they're on defense, it was kind of bad. We kind of started to feel a little bit bad for him as we're still just completely just taking away everything that he wants to do. So, hey, look, it's good to be on the other side of it, and it's our job to not be on that side of it, you know, when we're not doing our job. So we're always going to preach to do our job so we don't get in that situation.
So that's unbelievable, and that's the second time that has happened in consecutive openers. Remember when the Cowboys beat the Giants 40-0 in the opener last year, Micah Parsons said he was surprised they kept Daniel Jones in the game that long because they sacked him 7 times. The Giants are so bad, they're making their opponents feel sympathy for them. Football players who have no sympathy for anything, to whom and for whom it is preached from the moment it starts, particularly defensive football players. See man with ball, destroy man with ball. That's pretty much their marching orders. At no point does it say, have sympathy for man with ball. Consider how man with ball must feel right now. Like, that's not part of football. In the same way that there's no crying in baseball, there's no sympathy in football. Cam, what does it say about the Giants that they're actually inspiring sympathy in their opponents?
Yeah, maybe it's a strategy. You know, teams will let up on the gas so that they won't beat them as bad. Their point differential will be a little better. You know, people could save some jobs. Yeah, it's pretty terrible. And Greenard actually said in the interview as well, he, if you remember, came from Houston. So he's had 3 horrible seasons before they turned it around last year. So he knows he knows what it's like to be on the other side of this. So when he's doing it to another team, he's like, oh my God, I'm so glad that this isn't me for once that's getting beat down like this. But I do have sympathy for the guy that's just getting his ass kicked and looks completely discombobulated on the field. But yeah, for this to happen back-to-back years and for one of them to be a division rival and Micah Parsons being like, you know, I didn't really agree with the Giants' game plan to keep Daniel Jones in the game when we sacked him that many times is just like the lowest of low. Because you don't want pity from other teams if you're a Giants fan. You want to win. And that's the best they can get right now is pity for how bad they are. It's really embarrassing.
So I'm going to give everyone a little sneak preview of this week's First Draft podcast. So Mel Kiper and Field Yates have this terrific podcast called First Draft, and I joined them this year to ask the questions because, you know, Field was trying to serve both roles. And Field, by the way, is having his shoulder surgery today. Remember, he dislocated his shoulder with a tackling dummy in the Bahamas.
Yep.
So he's having his shoulder surgery today. We wish him the best. The podcast will drop tomorrow. It drops every Thursday during the season, and normally we will record it on Wednesdays. But because he's having an operation today, we did it yesterday. So I'll give you a little taste of what's in the conversation. Mel Kiper defends Daniel Jones. Mel defends Daniel Jones, and I want you to tell me if this is a reasonable defense. He's on a terrible team that has very, very poor talent around him. And he tore his ACL on November 5th. He tore his ACL November 5th. He is 10 months removed from ACL surgery. Clearly doesn't look right. He's a player who the overwhelming strength of his game was his athleticism and running ability. That has been taken away from him by the fact that he cannot move the way he normally can. And now he's standing out there in these ridiculous Montreal Canadiens uniforms, getting the stuffing kicked out of him so badly that the opposition feels sorry for him. The fans are ready to run him out of town on a rail, booing him so loudly, both in the stadium and then in private when they see him outside, that it's just become sad. It has become a genuinely sad story. And while no one is suggesting that he should be confused with Johnny Unitas, that he is in a situation in which no one could succeed. Is that a reasonable defense of Daniel Jones, yes or no, Bubba?
I guess it is. I mean, obviously, yeah, he's certainly not being put in the best positions to succeed, and obviously there is the injury. So those are certainly fair things, and I kind of have just been wondering, obviously, after we saw in week 1, could he be someone who's similar to Sam Darnold, where Daniel Jones clearly has talent. He had a good years in the beginning, especially a solid rookie year. And so is it just going to be something where he just needs to leave New York? And once he goes somewhere else, maybe as a backup with a Kyle Shanahan-esque good offensive mind, once he goes somewhere else, he'll blossom and be a good quarterback. But it's just not working in New York. And whether it's just because he's not surrounded by talent, he's coming in too quick from injury, it's just not working. So I get what Mel's saying. But I don't know. I mean, at some point you gotta perform and not have more pick sixes and touchdowns. At some point it's got to be on you. But maybe there is something to, hey, look, once he leaves New York, because I don't think he's, like you said, we're not confusing him with John Unitas, but at the same time, I don't think he's the worst quarterback that ever lived, which is kind of what he's playing like. So I think maybe there is something. Once he leaves New York, eventually maybe he can turn it around.
The really good year he had was. I guess it's now 3 years ago.
2022, they went to the
year
playoffs.
They won they
beat the Vikings, ironically.
Minnesota,
yeah,
and he got paid a bunch of money.
Yep.
And since that time, it's just been an unqualified disaster. That season is going to go down as a terrible year for the Giants.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And everyone involved. And the reason is because it gave everyone a complete misperception of what they were. That was a bad team that somehow through good coaching, and Daboll wound up the coach of the year, and Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones doing the things he can do well and not trying to do the other things too much, they wound up winning a bunch of games, and they made the playoffs, and they won a playoff game. And it convinced them and maybe others that they were something that they clearly were not. And that's been evidenced clearly by then. They paid Daniel Jones $160 million. Since that time, he's thrown 2 touchdowns and 3 picks. Again, John Mara has acknowledged they've done everything possible to screw him up. Now they let Saquon go. Saquon, I'm telling you right now, if he stays healthy, he's going to have an MVP caliber year. Saquon's going to be in the discussion at the end of the season for Offensive Player of the Year. Why? Because he's great. And he proved it on the Giants all those years when he had nothing around him. So Mel's defense of Daniel Jones, I think, is reasonable to the extent that I don't know that anyone could have succeeded in the circumstances he has been in. It doesn't mean he's acquitted himself particularly well. Clearly, that franchise needs a reset. It needs a new start. It needs a new face. And frankly, he needs a change of scenery too.